The rooftop terrace at Soho House West Hollywood sparkled under string lights and crystal chandeliers, its panoramic views of the city creating the perfect backdrop for Mom's 60th birthday celebration. 60 family members and close friends filled the exclusive space, their designer clothes and expensive jewelry reflecting the success that had defined the Martinez family for 3 generations. The party was everything Mom had dreamed of: champagne flowing like water, a 5-course dinner prepared by a celebrity chef, and an atmosphere of luxury that screamed achievement and prosperity. I stood near the edge of the terrace, sipping my club soda and watching the familiar dance of family politics play out against the glittering backdrop of Los Angeles. From this height, the city looked like a circuit board of lights stretching endlessly toward the horizon, each twinkling point representing someone's dreams, struggles, and aspirations. It was beautiful and overwhelming, much like the family gathering swirling around me. "Isabella, darling." Mom's voice cut through the ambient chatter as she approached, radiant in her custom Valentino gown. At 60, Elena Martinez was still stunning, her silver hair perfectly styled in an elegant updo, her figure maintained by the best personal trainers and nutritionists money could buy. She'd built Martinez Consulting from a one-woman operation into a multi-million-dollar firm that advised Fortune 500 companies on international expansion. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, embracing her warmly. The scent of her expensive perfume, something French and impossibly complex, filled my nostrils as she air-kissed my cheeks with the precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of social interaction. "Thank you, sweetheart. Isn't this magical? I can't believe how many people came out to celebrate with us tonight." I looked around at the assembled crowd, recognizing faces from the business pages of the LA Times: real estate developers, entertainment executives, tech entrepreneurs, and old money families who measured their worth in generations rather than years. "It's a beautiful party," I agreed, meaning it despite the familiar knot forming in my stomach. Family gatherings always brought out the best and worst in everyone, and I could already see the subtle hierarchies and judgments that would define the evening's conversations. "Isabella." My Uncle Roberto's booming voice carried across the terrace as he approached with his wife Patricia in tow. At 58, Roberto commanded attention wherever he went, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom tuxedo fitting him like a second skin. As the CEO of Martinez Industries, he was accustomed to being the most successful person in any room, and he carried himself with the confidence that came from never having to check his bank balance. "Uncle Roberto, Aunt Patricia," I said, preparing myself for the inevitable interrogation about my life choices and career prospects. "You look lovely, dear," Patricia said, though her eyes were already scanning my simple black dress with the kind of critical assessment that wealthy women perfected over decades of social combat. "Very understated. Where did you find that dress?" "Nordstrom," I replied honestly, watching her expression shift to barely concealed horror. "Nordstrom," she repeated as if I'd announced that I'd sewn it myself from burlap sacks. "How practical." Before I could respond, my cousin Sophia appeared beside us, her investment banker husband Marcus trailing behind her like an expensive accessory. At 35, Sophia was everything I wasn't: polished, connected, and married to a man who treated 7-figure bonuses like annual cost of living adjustments. "Isabella." Sophia's voice carried the kind of bright enthusiasm that wealthy people use when discussing charity cases. "How are you, sweetie? Still living downtown?" The question felt like a trap, though I couldn't quite see the mechanisms yet. "Yes, I have a place downtown." "That's so brave of you," Sophia continued with false admiration. "Living in such a diverse area. It must be quite an adventure." Diverse was clearly code for something less flattering, but I chose to ignore the implication. "I like the energy of the city center." "Of course you do," Marcus chimed in, his voice carrying the kind of condescension that successful men perfected when discussing people they assumed were struggling financially. "There's something romantic about urban living when you're young and starting out." At 32, after supposedly a decade of adult life, I was still starting out in my family's estimation. "The important thing," Patricia added with false kindness, "is that you're supporting yourself. Not everyone can afford to live in the better neighborhoods, and there's no shame in working within your means." Working within my means. Another polite way of saying I was poor without actually using the word. "Speaking of means," Roberto said, his businessman instincts apparently kicking in. How's the job market treating you these days? Still working in, what was it again? Real estate, I said carefully, using the same vague description I'd perfected over the past 5 years. Real estate. Sophia clapped her hands together with exaggerated delight. That's such an exciting field. Are you working with a residential broker? Helping people find starter homes and condos? Something like that, I replied, watching their faces cycle through various expressions of pity mixed with relief that they weren't in my position. That's wonderful, dear, Patricia said with the kind of maternal tone people use when encouraging children who are trying their best but clearly not succeeding. Everyone has to start somewhere in real estate. Maybe someday you'll work your way up to commercial properties or luxury listings. Someday. Maybe. The words felt like tiny daggers, each one carefully aimed to remind me of my presumed place in the family hierarchy. The real estate market in LA is so competitive, Marcus added with false sympathy. I can't imagine trying to make a living selling entry-level properties. The commissions must be modest. Modest commissions. Another euphemism for barely surviving financially. The conversation was beginning to attract attention from other family members, who were drifting over with the kind of curiosity that suggested they were hoping for entertainment at my expense. Are you still living in that tiny studio downtown? Asked my cousin Diana, appearing with her hedge fund manager husband in tow. I drove through that area last month. So many homeless people and street vendors. It must be challenging. It's a 1-bedroom, I corrected quietly, though I immediately regretted providing additional details for them to dissect. A 1-bedroom. Patricia gasped as if I'd announced I was living in a cardboard box. In downtown LA? With all that noise and chaos? How do you manage? I manage fine, I said, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment as more family members joined the circle of observers. Of course you do, sweetheart, Mom said, appearing at my elbow with obvious concern. Isabella has always been resourceful. She makes the best of her situation. Her situation. As if my entire life was a temporary setback that required careful management until I could afford something better. Still, said my brother Miguel, joining the growing crowd with his pharmaceutical executive wife, don't you think it's time to consider moving somewhere more appropriate? Maybe find a roommate and split the cost of a place in a better neighborhood. Roommate. At 32, my successful pharmaceutical CEO brother was suggesting I find a roommate to afford a better apartment. The truth is, Patricia said, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper but was clearly audible to the growing circle of family members, Isabella has made certain choices in life that have limited her options. What kind of choices? Asked my Uncle Carlos, though his tone suggested he was asking for the entertainment value rather than genuine curiosity. Well, Patricia continued, warming to her favorite topic, while the rest of us were building careers and establishing ourselves financially, Isabella chose a more bohemian path. Real estate sales, downtown living, shopping at chain stores. It's all very authentic and artistic, but it doesn't exactly lead to financial stability. Bohemian. Basic. More euphemisms for unsuccessful and poor. There's nothing wrong with modest living, Mom said loyally, though her tone suggested she wished I'd chosen differently. Not everyone needs to focus on material success. True, Roberto agreed with false magnanimity. Someone has to sell the starter homes and live in the affordable neighborhoods. It's honest work, even if it's not particularly lucrative. Honest work. Even if it's not particularly lucrative. The condescension was so thick I could taste it. The important thing, Sophia added with fake sincerity, is that Isabella is supporting herself. She's not depending on family money or living beyond her means. There's something admirable about accepting your limitations and living within them. Accepting your limitations. The phrase hit like a physical blow. Exactly, Patricia said, her voice getting louder as she warmed to her theme. Isabella understands her financial reality and lives accordingly. She doesn't try to pretend she's something she's not or live a lifestyle she can't afford. Though it must be challenging, Diana added with false sympathy, especially at family gatherings like this. Being surrounded by all this luxury when you're living in that tiny apartment downtown. It must make you feel. She trailed off, apparently unable to find a diplomatic way to finish the sentence. Feel what? I asked, though I was beginning to regret engaging with the conversation at all. Well, Patricia said, lowering her voice to what she imagined was a discreet whisper, she lives in that tiny apartment downtown. So embarrassing for the family. The words hung in the air like poison gas. 60 family members and friends continued their elegant conversations around us, completely unaware that I was being publicly dissected and found wanting by my own relatives. Embarrassing how? I asked, my voice barely audible. Well, when people ask where Eduardo and Elena's daughter lives, we have to say, downtown, instead of Beverly Hills or Manhattan Beach, Patricia explained with false patience. And when they ask what she does, we have to explain that she sells entry-level real estate instead of running a company or practicing law. It's not that we're not proud of you, Roberto added quickly, clearly aware that the conversation was becoming cruel. It's just that success in this family has always meant something more substantial. More substantial. Another way of saying I was a disappointment without using words that were overtly harsh. My phone buzzed in my purse, but I ignored it in favor of trying to process the public humiliation unfolding around me. These people who had raised me, who claimed to love me, were discussing my supposed poverty and failure as if I wasn't standing right there listening to every word. The real estate business can be very rewarding, Mom said weakly, trying to inject some positivity into the increasingly brutal conversation. Isabella works very hard at her job. I'm sure she does, Marcus agreed with false kindness. But working hard doesn't always translate to financial success, especially in competitive fields like real estate. The commissions on starter homes and small condos can't be very significant. My phone was buzzing insistently now, but I was too mortified to check it. Whatever call I was missing couldn't be more humiliating than this public analysis of my supposed financial failures. The important thing, Patricia continued, is that Isabella has found her niche. Not everyone can be a high earner, and there's nothing wrong with accepting a more modest lifestyle. Though I do worry about her future, Sophia added with theatrical concern. Real estate sales can be so unpredictable. What happens when she gets older and can't keep up with the physical demands of showing properties all day? The conversation was attracting more and more attention from other party guests, who were beginning to drift over with the kind of curiosity that suggested they were hoping for drama to enliven their elegant evening. Maybe she could transition to administrative work, suggested Diana helpfully. Property management or something like that. More stable income, even if it's not particularly exciting. Property management. They were already planning my career trajectory toward even lower-paying positions, apparently convinced that my current work was the peak of my professional potential. My phone was vibrating so aggressively now that several people were looking at my purse with curiosity. Whatever was happening, it was urgent enough to override my embarrassment. "Excuse me," I said, pulling out my phone to silence it. "I should probably take this." "Of course, dear," Patricia said with exaggerated understanding. "Probably a client calling about a showing. Real estate agents have to be available around the clock." I glanced at the caller ID and saw Whitmore Properties, Luxury Division. My realtor for high-end acquisitions, calling at what seemed like the worst possible moment. "I should take this," I repeated, though I was reluctant to have a private conversation in front of 60 family members who were already dissecting my life. "By all means," Roberto said grandly. "Don't let our family celebration interrupt your business calls." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. I swiped to answer the call, and Jonathan Whitmore's refined British accent immediately filled the air. "Isabella. Darling, I have the most wonderful news about your latest acquisition." His voice was loud enough to carry clearly through the terrace's ambient noise, drawing curious glances from family members who were suddenly very interested in my business call. "Jonathan," I said carefully, "you're on speaker. Could we perhaps—" "Perfect. Then everyone can hear the marvelous news," he interrupted with obvious excitement. "The penthouse at Millennium Tower is officially yours. Ms. Martinez, the $45 million penthouse is ready for your final walkthrough." The words hit the terrace like a sonic boom. 60 conversations stopped mid-sentence as guests turned to stare at me, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. $45 million? Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Indeed," Jonathan continued enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the family drama he was creating. The seller accepted your cash offer this morning. $45 million for the crown jewel of Century City, 12,000 square feet, private elevator, rooftop pool, and the most spectacular city views in Los Angeles. Patricia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the terrace floor, sending crystal shards and golden liquid across her designer shoes. The sound seemed to echo through the sudden silence like a gunshot. 12,000 square feet? Sophia breathed, her investment banker husband's mouth hanging open in shock. The interior design team can begin work immediately, Jonathan continued cheerfully. Though honestly, the space is so magnificent that minimal changes are needed. The previous owner spared no expense. Imported Italian marble, custom millwork throughout, and a wine cellar that could house 500 bottles. The details were hitting the assembled family like physical blows. I watched their faces cycle through disbelief, shock, and dawning comprehension that everything they thought they knew about my life was completely wrong. Jonathan, I said desperately, perhaps we could discuss the details privately. Nonsense. This is a celebration worthy of sharing, he replied with obvious delight. Isabella, you now own one of the most coveted addresses in Los Angeles. The Millennium Tower Penthouse has been featured in Architectural Digest 3 times. Celebrities and tech billionaires have been trying to buy that specific unit for years. Celebrities and tech billionaires? Roberto repeated weakly, his voice cracking like old leather. Oh yes, the seller received offers from several A-list actors and at least 2 Fortune 500 CEOs, Jonathan explained. But Isabella's cash offer and quick closing timeline won the day. $45 million, no financing contingencies, closing within 30 days. The seller called it the most straightforward luxury transaction he'd ever experienced. $45 million cash. The phrase seemed to break whatever was left of my family's ability to process reality. Cash. Miguel croaked. Naturally, Jonathan replied, as if paying cash for $45 million penthouses was the most normal thing in the world. Isabella's portfolio makes financing unnecessary. When you own that much prime Los Angeles real estate, banks become somewhat irrelevant. Portfolio. Mom managed to whisper. Oh, didn't I mention? This penthouse brings Isabella's total Los Angeles holdings to, let me check my notes, 14 properties valued at approximately $230 million. $230 million. The number seemed to physically stagger several family members. Uncle Carlos sat down heavily in a nearby chair, his face pale with shock. 14 properties? Patricia asked, her voice barely functioning. The Malibu Beach House, the Beverly Hills Estate, the downtown loft building, the Hollywood Hills compound, and now the Millennium Tower Penthouse, Jonathan listed cheerfully. Plus the commercial properties, of course. The office buildings in Century City and the retail spaces in West Hollywood. Commercial properties. Office buildings. Retail spaces. Each revelation was systematically destroying every assumption my family had made about my life and financial situation. Jonathan, I said, trying one more time to contain the damage, could we schedule a time to discuss? Oh, but there's more wonderful news, he interrupted with obvious excitement. The seller mentioned that the penthouse comes fully furnished with museum-quality art and a Steinway concert grand piano. Apparently, the previous owner was a classical music enthusiast who hosted intimate concerts for Los Angeles's cultural elite. Museum-quality art? Diana repeated numbly. Picasso's, Monet's, and a stunning Monet water lily series, Jonathan confirmed. The insurance appraisal values the art collection alone at $12 million. $12 million in art. More money than most of my family members were worth individually, and apparently it was just the bonus artwork that came with my new apartment. Isabella, Jonathan continued, when would you like to schedule the final walkthrough? The building's concierge is eager to welcome you to the Millennium Tower family. As the penthouse owner, you'll have access to all the building's amenities, the private gym, the rooftop garden, the wine tasting room, and of course the helicopter landing pad. Helicopter landing pad? Sophia gasped. Standard feature for penthouses of this caliber, Jonathan explained matter-of-factly. Though most residents prefer the private garage with direct elevator access. Isabella's unit comes with 4 parking spaces in the building's ultra-secure garage. The conversation was becoming increasingly surreal. Here I was, standing on a rooftop terrace while my family learned that their supposed poverty case owned more real estate than most corporations. "Jonathan," I said finally, "I'll call you tomorrow to schedule the walkthrough." "Brilliant." "Oh, and Isabella? Congratulations again on assembling such an impressive portfolio at such a young age. 32 years old and worth over $200 million in real estate alone. You're quite the inspiration for our younger agents." Worth over $200 million. The final revelation seemed to break whatever was left of my family's ability to function. The line went dead, leaving 60 party guests staring at me in complete silence. Patricia was the first to speak, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "You own 14 properties worth $230 million? "Apparently," I said, though my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. "But you said you lived in a tiny apartment downtown," Roberto managed to croak. "I said I had a place downtown. I never said it was tiny. The downtown loft building is actually quite spacious. I own the entire top 3 floors." "You own the entire building?" Miguel asked weakly. "I own several buildings actually. The downtown property is mixed-use, retail spaces on the ground level, office suites in the middle floors and my residence on top." The explanations were hitting them like waves against a seawall. Each new piece of information seemed to further erode their understanding of who I actually was. "But your clothes," Sophia said desperately. "You shop at Nordstrom and chain stores." "I prefer simple clothing. Money doesn't have to define your wardrobe choices." "But the tiny apartment," Patricia insisted, clinging to her original assessment like a life preserver. "You said you lived modestly." "I do live modestly. The downtown loft is only 8,000 square feet. Very reasonable for a city residence." 8,000 square feet is modest?" Diana gasped. "Compared to the Malibu house or the Beverly Hills estate, yes. The Malibu property is 22,000 square feet with private beach access. Beverly Hills is 15,000 square feet with a tennis court and infinity pool." The numbers were clearly overwhelming them. They were trying to process not just the financial implications, but the scope of what I'd built while they were busy pitying my supposed poverty. "Isabella," Mom said, tears beginning to form in her eyes, "why didn't you tell us?" "When would I have told you?" I asked gently. "During conversations about my embarrassing lifestyle? While you were explaining why I couldn't afford to live in better neighborhoods? While Aunt Patricia was discussing how my modest circumstances were shameful for the family?" The words hit the assembled crowd like stones thrown into glass. I watched my family grapple with the reality of their behavior, with the knowledge that they'd spent years treating a real estate mogul like a charity case. "We had no idea," Roberto said, his voice breaking slightly. "You had no idea because you never asked," I corrected. "You saw my simple clothes and modest behavior and decided I was struggling financially. You made assumptions about my success based on lifestyle choices that had nothing to do with my actual wealth." "But why live so simply if you have hundreds of millions of dollars?" Carlos asked, genuine confusion evident in his voice. "Because money isn't everything. Because I wanted to see if my family could love me for who I am rather than what I'm worth. Because I believe in using wealth to create value rather than to impress people." The explanation seemed to resonate with some family members while completely baffling others. They were struggling to reconcile their assumptions about wealth and display with the reality of someone who chose simplicity despite having unlimited resources. "What do you actually do?" Patricia asked weakly. "If you're not selling starter homes, what's your real job?" I looked around at 60 family members who had spent the evening discussing my supposed failures and limitations, none of whom had bothered to ask about my actual work. "I develop luxury real estate," I said simply. "I buy properties, renovate them, and either keep them as investments or sell them to ultra-high net worth clients." "Like celebrities and tech billionaires?" Sophia asked, remembering Jonathan's earlier comments. "Among others. The real estate market at the ultra-luxury level operates very differently from traditional residential sales." "How differently?" Miguel pressed. "Well, for instance, the Beverly Hills estate I bought last year for $12 million, I sold 6 months later for $28 million after renovations. The profit on that single transaction was more than most people make in their entire careers. $16 million profit. On a single property sale." The number seemed to physically stagger several family members. "Isabella," Mom said, reaching for my hand. I'm so sorry. We all are. How can you ever forgive us? I looked at these people who had raised me, who had shaped me, who had spent the evening publicly humiliating me for living in what they assumed was poverty. There's nothing to forgive, I said, though the words felt complicated even as I spoke them. You made assumptions based on limited information. It happens. But we were so cruel, Diana said, tears streaming down her face. So dismissive and condescending. Yes, you were, I agreed. But you also taught me the value of hard work and the importance of not judging people by appearances. In a way, your assumptions motivated me to prove that success comes in many forms. What happens now? Patricia asked quietly, her earlier smugness completely evaporated. Now you know the truth, I said. The question is what you do with it. We want to do better, Roberto said immediately. All of us. We want to understand your work, support your success, celebrate your achievements. I hope so, I said. Because despite everything, I love this family. But I won't tolerate being treated like a failure anymore. As the evening progressed and the shock of revelation began to settle, I found myself surrounded by family members who suddenly wanted to understand my business, my investment strategies, my vision for Los Angeles real estate development. The transformation was dramatic. From family embarrassment to family celebrity in the span of a single phone call. But more importantly, it felt like the beginning of honest relationships built on reality rather than assumptions. For the first time in 5 years, I was being seen for who I actually was rather than who they thought I should be. The tiny apartment downtown sat empty that night. All 8,000 square feet of it. A $200 million reminder that sometimes the most successful person at the party is the one everyone assumes can't afford to be there. After all, anyone can live in an expensive neighborhood. It takes something special to own multiple neighborhoods and still choose to shop at Nordstrom.